morning and welcome to the third Belgrade Security Forum. We apologize that we start exactly in time, but we have to, because unfortunately some of our panelists, due to our other very important obligations, will have to leave a little bit earlier, such as Minister Mr. Ružić, and I apologize on his behalf already at the very beginning. I was thinking this morning, of course intensively, what would be the best introduction to this forum? And I came to the conclusion that I can't figure out a better introduction than the one Tim Judah wrote for the forum. I think Tim not only captured the very spirit of the events, but also some of our not so secret hopes that this event will both intensify a high quality debate about security issues, about international relations, about people and their responsibilities in this very interdependent and more complex world, but that it will also put Serbia and the Balkans on the roster of a global debate. We want to be actors. It was enough to be discussed by others. We must do whatever we can. We are aware of our size and our importance, but if we are real actors, if we really want to help solving problems of others too, and not only looking at our own belly button, we will be understood not anymore as a problem, but as part of the solution. And this is why I like Tim's introduction so very much. And please allow me, instead of doing something else, and to, in fact, say a few words about our first panel. Tim, I already mentioned. He became part of us, and I understand that I got a promise that he will be with us in the future as well. Mr. Ružić, welcome in your new function as the minister who is responsible for the most important process of Serbia's future, presence and future, and that's the European integration process. But of course, this is the most important process for our entire region, because if we manage to walk that path, and we know that hurdles will meet us on every single step. I don't want to remind everybody what happened yesterday, but unfortunately this is the reality. But the important thing is that we are determined to cope with the reality and to work for our dreams. And our dreams are that we all want to be part and parcel of a great family of European people. Mr. Julian Braithwaite is someone I met when he was very young, and we had some great plans together in the end of the 90s, hoping that we will, it was maybe a little bit naive, but I'm not ashamed of it, and I don't think Julian is either. We were hoping that we can stop at least one war in the Balkans. We couldn't. But at least we knew that we are trying our best. This forum is here for all of us to think through what can we really do and do now. So we are here to think in order to act, and not only to think for the sake of thinking. But I'm in the same time very proud that this forum is really bringing a wealth of ideas that can then be transformed into practice. This forum wouldn't be possible without old and new friends. We thank we are our new friends. We are grateful to their support. We hope that they will turn into old friends. But without old friends, nothing works. And the oldest friend of this forum is Slovakia. The very idea, and you heard it, most of you all, this over and over again, the very idea to invent such a gathering in Southeastern Europe was born at the Global Security Forum in Bratislava, and from that moment on, and even before, Mr. Lajčák's predecessor, Mr. Eduard Kukan, helped us in the 90s and was with us when it was really tough. And then Mr. Lajčák, first as, of course, the ambassador in Belgrade, and then in other incarnations, became our continuous supporter. So he's one of the other people that I think heard a promise. As long as the Belgrade Forum is around, he will try to be with us, right? So, you see, this is how I'm making them to take, in front of you, to take some promises. Thank you very much, all ministers, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, to be here with us. And I wish us all a great debate.
Well, thank you very much, Sonia, and thank you very much for having us all here yet again. We are in a little bit of a hurry because Minister Ružić has to leave, and in a way that plays well for me because I read the title of this panel, and to tell you the truth, I was a bit baffled by it. State building and European integration, mutually reinforcing or contradicting processes. And I thought, this is a PhD title. This is not a kind of thing for a kind of, you know, short, sharp, snappy debate at a panel like this. So I'm just going to say one or two words, and then I'm going to very rapidly hand over to Minister Ružić. I meant what I said about the importance of not navel gazing. And of course, we should concentrate, and we will concentrate on the Balkans and the Western Balkans in this panel. But I thought something caught my eye from the news yesterday, and it's actually a statement from the Prime Minister of Ukraine. And Ukraine has yesterday, or the last couple of days, taken the difficult decision to basically sign up to a pact with the EU. I mean, that doesn't mean it's going to join the EU, but it's decided to make the difficult decision of the EU over Russia, so it seems. And his explanation was, quote, "We all want clean air and water, safe food, good education for our children, up-to-date medical services, reliable legal representation. All these are not abstract terms, but norms and rules that are already in place in the EU." Well, if that had been said by anybody in this region, I don't think that anyone would have blinked an eyelid, because it seems that's self-evident. That's what it's all about. And that's what I suppose we are talking about when we're talking about building modern states. But of course, these states are then going to pool sovereignty in the EU and in Brussels. And so while people like Vesna Pusic, for example, the Croatian foreign minister, are adamant that the actual process, especially from negotiation, has helped build a stronger Croatia and will build stronger states in the region. There'll be people for example, in my country, in Britain, who argue ferociously that the EU is something which is sucking power, making Britain and other countries less independent and less strong states. I mean, maybe this is something that Julian or Mr. Lajčák can tackle. So for every example that we can think of, or one argument, there's going to be a counter-argument. Croatia, yes, has helped build a stronger state. I remember clearly, I think it was Milan Ročen, I know it was Milan Ročen, then Foreign Minister of Montenegro, but I'm pretty sure it was exactly here 2 years ago, where he said the EU process, the demands of the EU process have meant that we have been able to do in 1 year what it would have taken us 10 years to do otherwise. But some states in the region, notably Bosnia, Macedonia too, are stuck despite being at the doors of the EU process. So I'm going to hand over to you, and I'm going to ask you, well, how does it look like from here? Are we building a modern state, or are you losing something of the essence of statehood? So you are, well, actually I should say there is actually, since we're talking about contradictions, a clear contradiction here, because Minister Ružić is Minister without portfolio for European integration. I mean, isn't that a contradiction? Perhaps that sums up what we're talking about here. But since you have to leave early, over to you.
Well, I wouldn't agree, because this is not only a Serbian invention. It's from the French practice, for example, because there are ministers of a political strong background in charge of some strategic orientations of the government. So I wouldn't say it's a contradiction. Concerning the topic that I should touch now, it's state and European integration. I would even like to dwell on the topic, so we can even talk about, because it's closely related, state of the European integration. And I think there are three main roles of the state in the European integration, and I would refer to the state of Serbia, because I'm the minister without portfolio in the Serbian government. And the role of the state is actually in the society, in the region, and in a wider Europe. Concerning the society, I think that the state is really in charge to implement all the standards and all the European values that will bring some benefit, substantial benefit and significant benefit to its citizens. And I think that the state of Serbia is really on a good path concerning that issue. Concerning the region, I can only say that I'm very happy that this process of stabilization and association has been finished. But that should not be an end goal. I think the end goal should be the full membership of all the states from the region in the European Union. And concerning the wider Europe, I think that our role as Serbia should be the contribution to the common foreign and security policy, and that would be very, very important. And if I dwell on this topic, I would say that the state of the European integration of Serbia is now very good, I would say excellent, because this is maybe the turning point, because there is a political will with the expert and technical effort functioning together. The government of Serbia is really devoted to this process, and we are expecting these processes of screening and so on, negotiating framework of the European Commission on the 20th of December, and so many things that we are actually prepared for. And that's why we are actually striving to accomplish all these values for our citizens. And your question was, are we losing something? Actually, the cost and benefit analysis of the European integration process. In a long term, I think that we will only gain benefits. And to explain this in a plain manner, I don't see why would be there 28 countries in an organization if it's so bad, or were they mistaken to engage themselves in this process? Of course, there will be so many obstacles, so many challenges, and the greatest challenge for us, and it's very odd when we talk about Serbia, because we always had challenges in the political field. Now we are succeeding to resolve all these issues, especially this Brussels agreement and the implementation that is going on. But the biggest challenge is actually the lack of finances that will be needed to accomplish this process in a successful manner. So those are the challenges. I've been to Brussels with my colleague Tanja Mišević yesterday, and we really got brilliant messages and brilliant support from the European Commission, from the European Parliament, a great level of understanding for all the specific issues that should not be an obstacle for the negotiation framework. And I would say that the state of the European integration of Serbia is on a good path, and we are very well, because of that, very well aware of the role of the state of Serbia in the European integration.
What's it like in, what's it like, I mean, I know you haven't been, what's it like in the real world, in the sense of outsiders or people like me have this idea that you basically get a rule book of 10,000 things you've got to do, and you negotiate a little bit on the margins, but there's not much that you can actually really negotiate because you're told that this is the way it is. You can tinker around on the margins, but then all these norms, rules, laws, regulations, you as a minister will then have to filter down to the ministries and say, this is the way it is, you've done this for 50 years, now do this. How does it work in the real world? Do you get resistance? How does it work?
There is no resistance, and it really depends what kind of a student you are. For the last 10 years, we have prepared ourselves, thanks to the Office for EU Integration and many other people from the civic society, from some professors and so on. So it's not really the matter of applying this bunch of rules, norms, and so on, but it's really the matter to understand what those laws, implementation of those laws, norms, and all these formalities, as we see them, are actually bringing when you apply them. What does the plain citizen get out of it? And that is our role to explain through the media and to influence really the public opinion of Serbia. And it sometimes from outside it looks very boring, but from the inside it's very, very challenging, very, very demanding, time consuming, and we have to do something that was done throughout more than 60 years, 62 years in the European Union, through the times of stability and economic growth. We have a poor social economic situation. We were not so stable in the 90s, you all know that. So we have to do that in a couple of years or even more. So this is a challenge, but I don't think that we are not prepared. So we like to take challenges.
But at the end of the day, on the day that Serbia joins, will Serbia be a stronger, better state than it is today?
I'm sure that Serbia will be a stronger state, and not only at that exact day, because during the process or while the process is proceeding, Serbia will gain the pace and become even stronger and take all the benefits out of it. We don't think that we will solve all our problems, either social, economic, or some other problems. But we know that we have a chance, we have an open door, and we should be wise enough to use this. If we are not wise, that's our problem, not really the problem of the European Union.
You say there's no resistance, but it's hard. Okay, ministries is one thing, but within the party, the body politic, aren't there people who are still saying the EU destroyed Yugoslavia, the EU destroyed Serbia and Montenegro, the EU stripped us of Kosovo? How much is that still a live political issue?
Well, I think that we've matured enough, so it's really the matter of perception. So I don't think that it's anymore the role of EU, because if we want to conduct some reforms, we are doing that in our best interest, and we don't do reforms in Brussels, Berlin, or London. We have to do them here, and it's in our best interest. So that is our role. And I don't see that, of course, this is a democratic society, and there are some voices heard that some legitimate voices that are Eurosceptic, and I cannot really oppose to that. But of course, it's really a minority, politically speaking, here in Serbia.
Now, you've got to leave in 5 minutes, so I'm just going to do something slightly different. I'm going to, sorry?
4.5.
4.5 minutes. Mr. Lajčák or Ambassador Braithwaite, is there anything that you'd like to direct here or to put to the minister while he's still here before you to give your short spiels? Otherwise, I'm going to ask if there's one person in the audience who's dying to ask a question, but I'm offering it to you first.
I mean, you said there was no resistance, and I think that is one of the really positive and hopeful signs. Really, is this sense of a sort of political consensus behind this process of European integration in Serbia. But what is it that you think that could undermine that consensus? Is there anything, or that building consensus? What are you concerned about as you look at the hard years ahead of patient negotiation, reform? I mean, this is a marathon, not a sprint. What are the things that you want to focus on in order to ensure that you're able to maintain that consensus, or build it and strengthen it?
I mean, I would like to see this process in a broad manner, and there are, of course, some priorities that we have to succeed in so that we can go on. And of course, when I say we are starting already on the 25th, we have a very, very demanding chapter, judiciary, rule of law. It's really demanding. We have to actually finish the reform process in this field. But I wouldn't say that there are any. I mean, we have the list of priorities, but I wouldn't give any exclusiveness to any chapter. We have to see this process as a one process that we have to go through. So we have to prepare, and we did all our capacities to do that. And the main thing for every country, Mr. Lajčák knows that, is the political will of the decision makers. And the two main decision makers here are really devoted to this process. So that's a good timing for the new age of the European integration.
Do you want to come in there?
We just spent 30 minutes together, so I've asked all my questions already. I don't want to.
I'm going to ask you one question before you leave. In this issue of European integration, in 1 minute, your final minute, what's the biggest challenge for Serbia and for the rest of the region, but for your country especially?
Well, the biggest challenge, I mean, it's very hard to define. We will see. The biggest challenge is the challenge of the European integration process. I mean, that is the biggest challenge. And I wouldn't say that, and I wouldn't define any other issue as the biggest challenge. There is the challenge of lack of money or financing the whole process when you want to, for example, comply with the environmental law from the acquis. There are challenges concerning this Brussels agreement and its implementation, local elections afterwards, parliamentary elections, community of Serbian municipalities in Kosovo. Those are all challenges, but I would only call it a challenge of the European integration process.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm sorry that you're going to...
Is there anyone that is dying to...
Well, if you've got a minute, if there's
yes,
one...
have
you got a minute?
I would just like to see who is the one that is
All right,
dying.
well, there's got to be one person out there who's dying to ask a question. This is your chance. Oh, yes? Okay, so please tell us who you are as well.
Thank you, Tim. My name is Angelusha Marina from Pristina Council for Foreign Relations. Thank you, Minister. It's interesting to hear you speak. I do agree with you that EU integration process is technical as well as political. You spoke mainly of the technicalities. Just now you dropped something slightly political. In my opinion, EU integration process for both Kosovo and Serbia is somehow interlocked. And I was just wondering if you want to touch a little bit on the political side of the EU integration process and the interdependence of Kosovo and Serbia, apart from just the municipalities that you mentioned. So all this question is in the light of yesterday's situation in Mitrovica North. Thank you.
Well, officially, of course, and on the behalf of the government, I have to condemn the incident that happened, and I hope that the investigation will be finished very, very soon. Concerning the interdependence, I would say that the whole region is interdependent, and we are keen to share the same values and same standards to apply them in our societies. And of course, some of us are more ahead, some of us are not, for either political, technical, or some other reasons. But until we reach the standards, I think that we will all share the same values.
Perhaps I'll just have one more question. What happens, we've kind of like we think, well, when you get to the day of joining, that's kind of a long way off. Let's deal with that problem when we get there.
Why should it be a long way?
Well, because there's a lot to do. I mean, it took Croatia.
I'm joking.
So fine, but let's say 5 years, 10 years. It doesn't matter. But when you get there, can you join without Kosovo?
As I told you, I see the European Union as a structure that really deals with common goals, common issues, common values. So the European Union is not a structure that divides. So I don't think that will be a question at that time when it comes.
Okay,
Thank
fine, all right. Okay, well, that's spoken like a true diplomat and politician, but okay, fine, that's your answer.
Well, I'm not saying you that.
Okay, fine, no, you're not a journalist, that's true. Okay, fine. Do you have some more time or not? Or
I don't.
You don't?
Unfortunately. I have to
Okay,
leave.
all right.
Thank you very much.
Good, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, no one, well, I suspect no other foreign minister or probably politician in the rest of Europe knows this region as well as Mr. Lajčák, who has been ambassador in Belgrade, helped supervise the referendum in Montenegro on independence, was the head of OHR in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and worked covering the Balkans at the European External Action Service. So we're very privileged to have you here and to ask you what you think about this question.
Thanks. Let me start by saying how pleased I am to be back in Belgrade. It's always a good reason to come here, but this security forum is a particularly good opportunity to see many friends and to talk to people. And I already had a number of meetings, and I am encouraged by the atmosphere. People know exactly what's at stake, what needs to be done, and it's not given in this part of the world. The processes that are taking place are positive in general, and I really hope we will be able to continue with the successful elections on the 3rd of November, and I do hope we'll be able to start the process of accession negotiations not later than in January. The team is ready, and people are eager to prove that the country has deserved it, and it's well prepared for that. And this terrible act that happened yesterday was no coincidence. But again, it's really important that we show to those people who want to derail this positive trend that there is no tolerance for this. Like you, I was puzzled when I saw the title of this panel, because I never looked at these issues from the perspective of this panel, but what I want to say is that there is absolutely no contradiction between the state building and European integration. Quite to the contrary. The process of European integration actually is a state building exercise, because you need to have a functioning state in order to be able to join the European Union. By the time the country is eligible for joining, you have to have a state where the rule of law is fully respected, when citizens' rights are well known and protected, civic rights, economic rights, legal rights, when a system of checks and balances is well in place, when the state institutions are controlled by a civil society in a transparent manner, when state institutions are accountable to the public. So this is all the state building exercise. There is absolutely no reason to believe that in the process of integration or after joining the European Union, you will lose your independence or identity, because I have never seen people mistaking Luxembourg for Finland or any other EU member state, so the identity is still there. What I want to stress is, however, that in order to build a successful and fully functioning state, the tangible perspective of joining the European Union is very important, if not crucial. Looking at my country and our own experience, I can hardly see such a successful process of transition if it was not for a clear European perspective. So this was the motivation, and this was the magnet that helped us to overcome all the difficulties, and it worked not only in case of Slovakia, but also at any other country. So what's important for the European Union here are two aspects. First, to provide this tangible and clear perspective, because we do want to see Serbia and other countries of the Western Balkans as fully functioning democratic states. And as I said, without a clear perspective, it's very, very difficult to get the motivation. And second, of course, to keep, maintain, and develop European Union in a way that it can serve as a model, so that this famous soft power or the pulling effect of the European Union is here, is in place. Obviously, and you can see that when we are dealing with our internal problems, then the overall attractiveness of the European Union outside in the world is going down. So therefore, our ability to react to the challenges in a proper way and to demonstrate that this is the best functioning model of integration of countries is here in place, and that has a very powerful impact, I would say even stronger than we realize, on countries in our neighborhood, be it here in the Balkans or in the countries to the east from the European Union.
But do you find when you're meeting with your colleagues from the other 27 countries, sorry, I know there are 28, I mean you plus 27 is what I'm, before anyone misinterprets what I mean, but do you find that there's a common agreement there, that basically everybody thinks like you, or not? What's it like in the meetings? I mean, do you have to persuade people from more skeptical countries that your view is the right view, or behind closed doors do people more or less agree? What's it like?
Well, unfortunately, there is no unity of views on this important issue. I think we are still struggling to get the proper balance between the political approach and the respect for technical criteria. And it has to be a balance, because it is ultimately a political decision to expand the European Union, but it is based on technical criteria that have to be fulfilled by future member states. Sometimes I'm afraid that we, the European Union, are paying too much attention to the technical criteria without seeing the political dimension of these processes, because these are strategic political decisions we must take. And let me use an example of a country which does not come from this region, namely Ukraine. We are about to make a fundamental political decision of signing or not signing the association agreement, DCFTA. And I'm astonished, I'm shocked to hear from some of my colleagues that they say, well, let's see whether the parliament will adopt this or that piece of legislation, and then we'll decide. I mean, our attitude, the way we see Ukraine and the place we want to have Ukraine must not depend on one or two pieces of legislation that will be adopted by the parliament in October or November. It's really a fundamental strategic decision. So there are moments when I am frustrated by the lack of this strategic vision and the lack of understanding of the ultimately political dimension of our decisions. At the same time, of course, our partners from the region of the Western Balkans sometimes tend to remind us very much of the political dimension and thus somehow hide the fact that the technical criteria were not met. And EU integration process is a process that you must fulfill the criteria, otherwise you won't be able to function. So the proper balance needs to be found, and I don't think we have found it.
Okay, thank you very much. Ambassador Braithwaite, you've had a kind of intimate relationship with this region for the last 20 years, and you're now the ambassador to the Political and Security Committee of the European Union. So, well, over to you. How do you see it?
Thanks, Tim. And really I had three things to say. I was going to try and answer the exam question that we've been posed, but before I do, you're right, I'm a British diplomat, but I'm also a Serbski Zet, and I'm married to a local girl. I've lived here in Belgrade. One of the privileges of my current job in Brussels is that I do get to deal with the issues of this part of the world very closely, but in a very different context from the one that Sonia and I were working on in the 1990s, where we were trying to support civil society. Many of the people here in this room I worked with then, and it's a delight really to come back and see them now in positions of government and positions of authority in a country that now is on the threshold of this process of European integration, as a candidate to join the European Union. In Sonia, back in the 1990s, I'm not sure if either of us could have thought that this day would really be something we could count on, and that's it's a real pleasure to be back here in those much more hopeful circumstances. The three things really I was going to say in answer to sort of the question was that, of course, as Miroslav has said, the EU is a fantastically successful state-building project, but but I suppose the second point is it is also limiting in terms of the role of the state, and it has its limits. And then the third thing I was going to do is perhaps come on to what this means for Serbia and the region. In the middle of this Euro crisis, it's quite easy to sort of forget that actually the European Union is a community of some of the most successful states on the planet. On any metric that you care to mention, whether it's GDP per head, whether it's life expectancy, whether it's the rule of law, whether it's infant mortality, whether it's the murder rate per thousand of population, the states in the European Union are at the top of all of those global metrics. And as I say, it's quite often easy to forget that as we look at the problems that the European Union has, at the issues of the euro, at the economic crisis. But that is a reality, is that this part of the world, the European Union, is one of the best governed parts of the planet. And the European Union is part of the reason for that. A couple of caveats, of course. The EU member states were successful states before they joined, either because they're well-established states, or because, for the reason that Miroslav said, the magnetic power of joining the European Union provided that galvanizing force, that political motivating force, for states to reform and become successful states. So by the time a state joins the European Union, it is, by definition, a successful state. The second caveat is precisely that point, which is not the European Union that builds states, it's states that build states. It's their politicians, it's their electorates, it's the sort of coalitions of interest that decide that, yes, these reforms, these difficult reforms, dealing with the vested interests that are trying to maintain the status quo, that it's worth tackling those vested interests, it's worth those difficult political processes in order to join the European Union. So it's states, it's their political leaders, and it's the electorates that support them that build states. But undoubtedly, if you look at what happened after the Second World War and the role that the European Economic Community played in terms of cementing those states that were coming out of that awful period, if you look at the role that joining the European Economic Community played for Greece, coming out of dictatorship, the same with Portugal and Spain, if you look at the role that the European Union played really reuniting the continent after the fall of the Berlin Wall, it has played a crucial role in perhaps not state building, but something state stabilization in terms of harmonizing and stabilizing states around a particular model. And I suppose that's my second point, which is that it's a state-building process, but it's a limiting process, and it does have its limits. I mean, it's limiting in the sense that one of the things the European Union has done is frozen borders in Europe. And there have been no border changes really within the European Union once you join the European Union. It actually stabilizes the states within their existing borders. I mean, the dirty secret of most European states is they were created through conquest and war and expansion. The European Union has brought an end to that process of state building, and for very good reasons, and it's one of its great contributions to peace, security, not just in this region, but globally. But that is what you sign up to. You sign up to clearly defined borders that don't change unless there is a democratic process. The UK may test that particular theory with its referendum next year in Scotland. But if you look around the European Union, one of the things it has done is it has stabilized states that actually, if you look at Europe's previous history, have always been moving. Borders have always been moving. The second thing, these are very specific types of states. They are states based on European values. We hold them to be universal, but they are values that began in this continent. They're values of democratic accountability, of human rights, of open markets, and that is the model. This is a very specific model of the state that the European Union enshrines. I think if you talk to the leaders of successful states in Asia, they wouldn't say that that's necessarily the only definition of a successful state, but it is the one that the European Union is united by. And then perhaps the third sort of limiting factor is that it is, as you said, it's also about making cooperation and the pooling a certain degree of sovereignty compulsory. That is part of the membership dues of the European Union, is you do agree that you are going to cooperate and you're going to share a certain degree of sovereignty in the common interests. And it's limited, though. This is a process of state building that's really limited. It's limited to Europeans. I mean, it's an obvious point. It's limited to those countries that the membership of the European Union considers to have a European perspective, and it's limited to those countries outside the European Union that do feel European enough that they're prepared to galvanize themselves politically to take on these difficult reform processes in order to join the European Union. And we've all agreed, as we did at Thessaloniki nearly a decade ago, that this part of Europe was European and had the right to join the European Union. We're still having that debate, as Miroslav said, we're still having that debate about the eastern neighborhood, as we call it in the European Union. The UK's view is that Ukraine should have the right to join the European Union if it pursues the reforms that are necessary to do that. But that isn't a consensus view in the European Union today. But fortunately, it is a consensus view in the European Union today that the countries of the Western Balkans, this part of Europe, are European countries that have the right to join the European Union if they can meet the criteria. And the other limit that I'd identify is the European Union is limited by, this process is limited by the nation state. I mean, 10 years ago, we were talking about the decline of the nation state. I think what the economic crisis has shown is that ultimately the backstop of our systems, the backstop of our systems of governments, of our economies, of our societies, are the nation states. And if you look at public opinion across Europe, they are clear that there's integration can only go so far. Even in Germany today, a recent poll showed that the institution that the German people trust the most is their constitutional court in Karlsruhe, their national court in Karlsruhe. 71% of Germans trust the court in Karlsruhe, because that's the court that is trying to strike this balance between integration and the role of the state. 2 to 1 in Germany want to repatriate powers from the EU level to the national level. So this process of integration is reaching perhaps its limits in terms of where currently public opinion across Europe is, although that is that's a debate, and there's always been a tension between the leadership role that politicians play and where public opinion is. And to a certain extent, of course, this project has depended on political leaders to push it forward and then to convince and bring their peoples with them. Last point really on what all of this means for Serbia and the region. I mean, as I said at the beginning, I mean, it's fantastic to come here to Belgrade at a time when this is such a hopeful prospect. I began my career working on Bosnia during the war. I worked on the Eastern Slavonia negotiations at the end of the war when Serbs were fleeing in their tens of thousands from the rest of Croatia. And this was the last population of Serbs in Croatia that was facing the tanks pushing them across the Danube. And we are so far from that today. And the sense that I have here, and the first time I really felt this was when I was working with Paddy Ashdown in Bosnia, is that you see at a certain point a sort of a country flicks a switch, and there is this political choice to move towards Europe. And I saw that in Croatia when I was in Bosnia over a decade ago. You saw that the HDZ decided that actually they were really in favor of a European Croatia, not a greater Croatia. And once you see the sort of the political momentum moving behind that, this thing starts really gathering pace. And I think that is what we're witnessing here in Serbia. I mean, we just heard from the minister today about that this is something that you do not for Europe, you do it for yourself. You do it because it's in your own interests. And it's when the political leadership of a country decides that these reforms are in their own interest. They're not doing it because someone's told them to. They're doing it because this is actually what's going to be better for them, for their people. It's what they want to sort of make their political project. That's when you really start feeling that there is hope that this thing will really happen. And that, I think, is what we're witnessing here. I think it's not secured, but that is hopefully what we're witnessing here. And this process of European integration is really the answer to the sort of complexities of a part of the world like the Western Balkans. I mean, there are Serb communities still in Croatia. There are Serb communities. My wife has family in Bratunac, so I know just how complex that is. There are Serb communities, obviously, in Bosnia, and there are Serb communities in Kosovo. None of that will make sense unless Serbia and those countries are part of a wider political structure where the borders don't really matter anymore. You can drive, you could drive to Mitrovica or you could drive to Vukovar without having to show your passport, where there will be ways in which those political communities, those social communities can come together across borders, and the European Union provides that framework. It provides that framework for stabilizing what is a complex part of Europe where identities are not just bounded by the borders of the nation state. So it is, this is a process that will hopefully lay to rest all of those shifting borders of previous decades and centuries. My other point on this is that Serbia really mustn't delay. I mean, we're reaching the end of that great wave of enlargement where every decade tens of millions of European citizens were coming into the European Union. That's coming to an end. And that's coming to an end because actually we're reaching the limits of where we can all agree are the boundaries of Europe. But we're also, within our own national populations, where there's a fatigue that's set in, there's concerns about migration. Serbia mustn't give Europe any excuse not to let them in. And so starting these negotiations and then just really pushing forward on the reforms, being visibly engaged and committed to this process. I'd highlight one example that I think has done Serbia fantastic credit in Brussels. When we were setting up an EU military mission, training mission for Somalia, we were desperately looking for a medical team that was crucial expertise for this mission. And none of the EU member states could come up with the medical team. And then Serbia came up with their specialist team from Weimar, who came and joined this EU mission. And that was something that everyone recognized was a contribution that no other member state was able to make, but Serbia could make it. So things like that demonstrate where Serbia can be part of this sort of community that is the European Union and build that momentum and that sense that Serbia deserves to be in the EU, I think is very, very important. And my last point is that the other thing that's so important about Serbia's process of integration is the message it sends to the rest of the region, and particularly to Bosnia. I mean, we used to talk in Bosnia when I was working for Paddy about replacing the push of Dayton with the pull of Brussels. And I'm afraid we failed. There is not that political traction in Bosnia today that we had hoped for. But with Croatia now in the European Union, with Serbia actually moving ahead, there is a hope that that too will now galvanize, finally, a political process that will bring Bosnia along with it. But it's very important, I think, for the rest of the region that Serbia succeeds. So I'm delighted that the process is beginning. I'm delighted that I'm in a position in Brussels where I can be involved in it. And I'm delighted that actually it looks like there's a real momentum building here in Belgrade and across Serbia. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to ask you both a couple of questions, and I think that it's important to just for this bit anyway, not to focus on this region, because we'll doubtless come back to that in the questions. Julian, you talked about the way that the EU had basically frozen borders, had stabilised things. I've got a question for both of you, because obviously both of you are on the inner sanctum of Brussels and the EU top. The Dutch, I think it was the Dutch, who have said no more ever closer union. What does that mean for the future? Does that mean that we've got to? You said that there are limits. Have we now reached the limits, and everything will now sort of freeze? And in theory, it will be the same forever. But surely, if that happens, then the EU will ossify. I'm not saying that it doesn't necessarily have to be ever closer union, but if you freeze it, then it will just ossify and perhaps go backwards. And then there is this other question, slightly relating to this issue of disintegration. Would Scotland, would Catalonia be talking about independence if it wasn't for the EU? Surely it's the EU which gives them the opportunity to talk confidently about independence, because they'll still be part of some bigger umbrella. So what's your view on those two issues? First of all, Mr. Lajčák.
Well, obviously there's no freeze, and there won't be any freeze, because European integration is a process. It's like bicycle rides. You have to keep pedaling, otherwise you fall. And we are now involved in two sets of discussions. First one, the understanding of need for further integration, because with all the competencies that we have delegated to the European institutions, we were found unprepared by the crisis, and we had no mechanisms to deal with the crisis. As we said, that 17 countries with single currency and with 17 separate fiscal policies, it just cannot work. So we need deeper integration, and at the same time, it's a very legitimate ask about how the Union handles the competencies that were already sent to the European level, and whether it would not be easier and better for member states to get some of the competencies back. Because one of the problem EU is facing is that it gets detached from European citizens. European institutions have the tendency to turn into the world for themselves. And after spending a couple of months in Brussels, you switch to a language no one else can understand. We are adopting numbers of documents which is impossible to comprehend. So therefore people do have problems to accept some of the regulations, and are asking, why is this necessary? So I think the processes we are witnessing, particularly in the UK, in Netherlands, are legitimate. And it's good that we have this review, and as we are prepared, and Slovakia certainly is ready to go further and deeper in European integration, so that our system is efficient. But we are also supportive of the process of reviewing the competencies that have already been sent to Brussels, so to say. But it's important that it's not pick and choose. It's not taking the best parts and leaving the rest for the others. It's also important that the European Union continues to exist as a union of 28 member states, as an agreement among the 28, and not as a set of 28 individual agreements between individual member states and Brussels. It won't work this way. So there is nothing wrong with this discussion that is going on, provided we all have the interest of European Union as our priority. And what we do is done in order to make EU even more efficient, even more successful.
Julian, We've mentioned a referendum in Scotland, but we haven't actually mentioned a referendum on EU membership. To be a bit provocative, do you think you could lose your job in a couple of years' time? Or you or your successor lose their job?
Well, I think if we left the European Union, Britain would have even more need for people who understood the European Union, so I think I'm safe. But I mean, coming back to your original point, I mean, what has the process of European integration was always based on popular legitimacy, but it was an implicit legitimacy that came from European populations who just understood intrinsically how important it was for European nations to cooperate together so that they would never repeat the recent past that they and their parents had gone through. And that was particularly strongly felt on the continent, obviously. And that has taken this basically rather technocratic process of European integration, where the Commission is the guardian of the treaties and has a right, not mandated by any election, but has a right to propose legislation, so on and so forth. It's actually a very sort of technocratic, not particularly explicitly democratic process, actually, but it had a great deal of popular legitimacy particularly across the 6 original members of the European Economic Community, but also across the members that joined subsequently. But that mandate, if you like, has run its course. And what the European Union is now struggling to do is find new ways of building popular legitimacy for future projects that go beyond that. And this is where this sort of struggle over the sort of democratic deficit, democratic accountability comes in here. What is the way in which these processes of integration, these decisions that get taken in Brussels, can be made accountable to ordinary citizens in a way that they feel means that they have a say in them? And this is the risk that the European Union has now, and the Euro crisis has highlighted, is if you're a young person in Spain today, do you feel you have a say over your future? Do you feel that the 50% youth unemployment in Spain is something that you, through your democratic right to vote, can have some sort of say in addressing? And if people think that actually those decisions are being taken by people they don't vote for in Brussels, who aren't part of their government, that will have a corrosive effect on the European Union. So there is a sort of I wouldn't call it a crisis of legitimacy, but there is a problem of legitimacy that the European Union is grappling with. So I think that's one side of it. I mean, your second point about the British referendum, I mean, that is actually the other side of this coin. In Britain, the process of our membership of the European Union is clearly contested. There are many who argue we'd be better off out. And in the end, if you can't convince at least 50% of your population that it's better off being in the European Union, then perhaps we shouldn't be in the European Union. Personally, I think it's absolutely in our interest to be in it. And I also think that this is an argument that actually can be won. But if we are to, if we're to practice what we preach and believe that actually these processes do need to be accountable to our electorates, then the case for a referendum and then winning it and winning that argument democratically is strong. It is there. And it's the same reason why we haven't shied away from the issue of a referendum in Scotland. Again, if you can't convince a majority of the Scots that they're better off being part of the Union, then they shouldn't have to be part of the Union. And again, that is an argument that I believe can be won. But we need to be ready to win that argument. And if you can win those arguments democratically through legitimate democratic processes that everyone agree on the ground rules of them, your state and your democracy is stronger for it. So yes, we can't take the answer of any of these referenda for granted, but are they in themselves a bad idea? Not necessarily.
I'm going to ask you one more question before we throw it out. If you read the popular press in Britain, but not just in Britain, I have no doubt, whereas Balkans 10, 15 years ago meant here, now it doesn't. It's quite narrowly focused to, well, apart from holidays on the Croatian coast or in Montenegro, it's quite narrowly focused to the issue of Bulgarian, Romanian migrants and Roma migrants. Is that going to be a problem for the Western Balkans? Are people going to go, oh God, like not more problems? Is that going to be a problem?
It is. Of course it is, because it changes the perception of the whole process. Obviously the era of enlargement romanticism is over. We are back to the real world. There is very little enthusiasm, and it's logical that European citizens worry about their jobs, about the social protection. Everybody speaks about crisis. EU is dealing with its own matters. So there is less attention to the region of the Western Balkans, and as I said, less enthusiasm. There is no fatigue, and there is certainly no going back from the commitment to continue the enlargement process. But I would say it's now more for the countries of this region to demonstrate to the citizens of European Union why is it good for us to take these countries on board. Because everybody knows it's good for the region. But people would say need to be convinced more than before that it's also good for the European Union itself. And of course the best way you can do it is to show your political maturity, as Belgrade has shown lately with the process of negotiations with Pristina. The way you deal with your neighbors, the atmosphere in the region. So people are, of course, preoccupied with the problems we are facing now. They don't want to see future problems. They don't want to see this process as something that will make our life more difficult, more complicated. And of course, it's also about money. So this is now the moment when countries of this region, who know everything about the processes, about the procedure, have to think about how to make the case more attractive for the citizens of the European Union, not by stressing that it's EU's responsibility or it's our right to join the European Union, but by showing and by your actions, by your deeds, that what we are trying to achieve is good actually for you, not only for us.
Is it something which can be won, an argument which can be won in Britain and in other countries?
Britain was always the member state that championed enlargement, and has, as one of the bigger member states, it's been one of the most consistent in championing enlargement. The politics of that are changing in the UK. The UK in 2005 was one of 3 countries, along with Sweden, I think Ireland, that allowed complete freedom of movement to all of the new countries joining. And that's been a boon for the UK. I mean, any study of the economic impact of migration as a result of that shows that the British economy has benefited from it. But in sort of micro communities across the UK, it's had a real impact on the people who are already living there and already using the local schools and the local hospitals. Suddenly, those schools and hospitals are struggling, and people are saying, how did this happen? And so, migration has become a touchstone issue. The UK Independence Party its strongest card is, we're going to close our borders to more of that uncontrolled migration, because it's the EU that's taken away that control from us, and that resonates for a lot of people who have found themselves competing for public services and benefits with people who have just turned up in the UK, and this is where Bulgaria and Romania come in, because the end of the restrictions on the freedom of movement, which actually the UK did put in for Romania and Bulgaria, come to an end at the end of this year. And so there's this fear being pushed, of course, by certain parts of the British political spectrum, that this will lead to waves of new migrants. And that is that's a factor that British politicians of all political parties have to take into account. But my instructions that I get in Brussels are still to be supportive of further enlargement, to be on the side of Ukraine's European perspective, to push back against other member states who say maybe the European Union has enlarged enough and we should just now close our borders for the future. But it is a harder political battle to win than it used to be. The UK, by its very nature, is a very open, cosmopolitan society that does believe in looking outwards and believes in a European Union that looks outwards, and the British electorate are comfortable with that concept of the European Union. But this migration issue is undermining that political will, and we will have to, as Miroslav said, we're going to have to demonstrate why it's not just in these countries' interest to join the European Union, but it's in our interest for them to join, and it's issues around stabilization, it's issues around the issues of organized crime, of the instability of this part of the world has produced in the past, of ending that really forever. And people, you don't have to be very old to realize that actually instability in this part of the world can cause enormous hardship, not just for people here, but has resonance right across Europe. And those are the arguments that we need to win.
Great. Okay. Well, we've got just over 30 minutes left, so I'm going to open it up. Please, and over there. Sorry, it's a bit hard to see, but yes, over there. And please say who you are. Perhaps we should do groups of 3 questions. So 3 questions or comments. A lady at the back, yes, sir, yes, and a gentleman over there. So that'll be our first 3. So please, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Milada Vahudova. I'm at UNC Chapel Hill. And my question is for Mr. Lajčák. So I fully agree with you that the EU pre-accession process leads to positive reforms. These are reforms that the countries should be doing anyway, right, for the lion's share of them. But for the 2004 and 2007 waves, there were some areas where the EU pre-accession process really didn't tackle them, right? So the fight against corruption, also reform of the judiciary was not something that was particularly well integrated into the pre-accession process. And so my question for you is, are there some things that you wish the EU had asked Slovakia to do during the pre-accession process? Or another way to put the question, is the EU pre-accession process now substantially better at these rule of law questions, reform of the judiciary, the fight against corruption and organized crime, and quite simply state capture, which is what we've seen in Bulgaria and Romania? Thank you.
Okay. Yes?
Thank you. My name is Besa Shahine. I am a senior analyst with the European Stability Initiative. My question is also for Mr. Lajčák. You said something which is so true this morning, that without a clear European perspective, it's very hard to see how the Western Balkan states are going to develop. Now, Serbia has a very clear European perspective. However, Macedonia doesn't really. It's being blocked by Greece on a name issue. Bosnia doesn't really. It's being sort of blocked by its own internal political divide. And Kosovo doesn't really. And this has, Kosovo cannot even apply, not because of anything to do with Serbia, but because the EU itself doesn't recognize Kosovo as a state, because countries, member states like the country where you come from don't recognize Kosovo as a state. And this creates a situation where you have front runners like Serbia and Montenegro, and then you have these laggards in the rest of the region. What is the thinking in the EU about some of the solutions to this issue? How to not allow parts of the region to fall behind? Thank you.
Okay, yes, gentleman over there.
Thank you. My name is Karimi. I'm from IPIS, Iran. I would like to ask you about the distinction between the national foreign policy and CSDP, the Common European Foreign Policy. I am in favor of European integration, but coming from outside of Europe, we feel that when a new member gets into the European Union, their independence will narrow, particularly in foreign policy. We had the minister in the morning saying that the biggest challenge of the European Union is the financial accommodation. So when the rich nations, they pay, it is naturally they play. Germany, Britain, and France, they try to impose their own foreign policy upon the rest of the members. Perhaps if the Scots are opting out because they are fed up with the policies applied through London. So I think this is a very good example to know how you define the differences between national foreign policy and CSDP. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much. I think that last question could probably occupy us for a couple of days. Have you got a foreign policy, Mr. Lajčák, or is it imposed by richer countries that pay, or how does it work in the real world?
Well, the first question about the accession process and criteria. As I said, EU accession process is a process. It is a state-building exercise. You have to be eligible to be compatible. They said joining the EU, actually it's wrong, because you are not joining the EU. You are building the European Union inside of your countries, and the membership is the seal of approval that you have done it successfully, that you are now compatible with the EU standards. Does it mean you have reached the state of nirvana and everything is perfect and ideal? No. But you are good enough to function within the EU family and EU system. My second point, even if we say that the accession process is the same and the criteria are the same for every new member, we know it's not true, because the process is evolving, and after every accession, every enlargement, Union is also taking lessons and learning lessons, and of course applying some lessons on the new future members. There is no, or the best example, the best demonstration is that for the countries of this region, the chapters 23 and 24 that have proved to be problematic are now the ones with which we start the process and which are going to be closed at the very end. Issues such as independence of judiciary, fight against corruption, I mean, these are eternal processes. It's really about limiting the space for corruption. These phenomena will be here all the time. It's good that EU is able to adjust and to reflect, to see that what were the loopholes in the screening process in the past, so that we do not face the same kind of problems. And of course, and that's also very important, the countries are highly motivated and they are working very hard in the process of integration. It must not be replaced by complacency the moment you join. You must not start believing that now you are ideal, everything is done, your job is finished, and you can enjoy the ride. So that means you have to continue to reform yourself, to adapt, because the world around us is changing. And we see and we witness problems with respect for basic European values, with respect for democracy in some European member states. And that's also one of the challenges for the European Union, to have the instruments to deal with these problems when they occur in the countries who are already members of the European Union. So it's a process. And I really believe that our accession process was fair, was demanding, it helped us a lot, and I also understand why some adjustments were made, because they are for the benefit of future members and for the benefit of the future European Union. The second question about the clear European perspective and about the division we see here in the region. I think that Serbian example shows clearly that all you need is a political will and resolve. There are no impossible issues, there are no unsolvable problems. What we are seeing is the readiness or the lack of it to deal with these problems. Serbia has had the issue of Kosovo. Macedonia has been struggling with the name issue. Bosnia and Herzegovina is now identified with the Sejdić-Finci problem. But you see, Serbia found the political will to start dealing with its relationship with Kosovo, and it's moving, and everybody is appreciating that. And no one can tell me that finding a solution to the Sejdić-Finci is more complicated than reaching a deal between Belgrade and Pristina, and let alone the name issue. So I see no political will in Skopje or in Sarajevo. When you go to Sarajevo or to Skopje, you hear what the others should do differently. You don't hear what we are going to do differently. And that's the problem. So it takes two to tango. It's true in this case. European Union should do its part of the work, but we cannot do the part our partners must do. Kosovo's case is specific, but What's important is that no one questions the European perspective for the entire region, including Kosovo. And consecutively, every December, we adopt the set of conclusions with regard to the enlargement where Kosovo is part of, and these conclusions are adopted by the consensus of all EU member states, and I think this is encouraging. And the last question, it would be a question for a whole new panel about the national foreign policy and CSDP. One of the major fundamental changes the Lisbon Treaty introduced was particularly in the domain of European foreign policy. And it started a process. We have European External Action Service, we have the High Representative, and the situation has changed. Now, there is less space for member states and more space for the European foreign policy, which is good, because we want the European Union to be a player who is visible, who is efficient, who is fast enough, who is flexible, and for that we need to transfer more competencies in the area of foreign policy. So the philosophy is simple. Whenever and wherever we can agree on common position, this position should be communicated by the representative of the European Union, by the High Representative. But apart from that, there is a lot of space that member states can exercise their own particular national interests, and of course they are acting independently here. There should be no competition. Sometimes it is, but don't forget it's the beginning of the process. But we are moving in the direction of having common European delegations or embassies. One EU house where member states will send a couple of diplomats to cover that particular area that is interesting for them. We are moving in the direction of sharing our political reporting rather than multiplying the same effort. We are moving into the direction of making one European address instead of 27 in third countries, or 15 or 20. So it is working, and when you look back, 2-3 years ago, even here in this region, US was the #1 player. Right now, Belgrade-Pristina process is clearly EU-led process. European Union has a strategy for Bosnia and Herzegovina. EU is more and more #1 player in many areas, which was not the case 3 years ago. So we are moving, and I'm absolutely sure that in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, European foreign policy will be very different from what it is today. But I'm still not afraid that the foreign ministers of the EU member states will get out of job, because there will be still plenty to do for us.
But we don't have a common foreign policy on Syria, for example.
We don't, so
we don't. Okay.
We are struggling.
But could we in 10 years, or is that also unlikely? I mean, or whatever is the crisis in 10 years?
We don't have common position, common foreign policy on Ukraine even, or other countries which are close to us. But we are struggling. We are sitting for 12 hours. We are discussing. We are trying to get there.
All right. Do you want to pick up on any of that or any of those issues, Julian?
12 hours. If only it was only for 12 hours. I spend hundreds of hours every month on this, which is, I mean, the process that I'm involved in is precisely this process of common European foreign policy. But it's not imposed on anybody, because all these common positions require unanimity to agree them. And so the debate is, put crudely, my instructions are to try and align European common positions with British foreign policy positions. That's my role in a sentence. But it's a negotiation. And there is, I mean, as Miroslav said, there is a sort of there's a deal. The UK gets to talk in the name, or France gets to talk in the name of Europe, but has to compromise and allow a say to all of the members of the European Union in order to agree those common positions. And also, once those common positions are agreed, now increasingly, for those to be very ably represented by the growing External Action Service, which Miroslav was a leading member. And it's thanks, not least really, to Miroslav's work, I think, in Brussels in those initial 2 years, that the EU role here in the Balkans has grown in such a degree as he describes. And it's not just here. I mean, yes, these common European positions are agreed by unanimity, and yes, there are big and controversial issues in the world where we can't reach common positions. And it takes time. But actually, when you do have these common positions, the EU can be a player that the UK couldn't be, or France couldn't be, or indeed that the United States couldn't be. I mean, if you look at, what the EU is particularly good at doing is dealing with long-term processes, more chronic crisis management than acute crisis management. I mean, Syria is very much an acute crisis, and ultimately, if it's going to come down to military action, these are decisions taken by political leaders in a few countries. But if it's coming down to what do you do about the Horn of Africa over the next 10 years, or the Sahel, yes, there might be an initial approach which is led by just one country, say the French in Mali, but the follow-up over years and over at least the next decade or more will be by the European Union. Capacity building, development support, economic market opening, political engagement through special representatives. There's a whole, what's in Brussels called a comprehensive approach, which when applied to these sort of chronic problems, particularly on the periphery of, the far periphery of Europe, where the European Union is developing real capabilities and a real track record. So yes, there's the enlargement process, which here in the Balkans has a huge political impact and is one of the most successful examples of European external policy. But also in Africa, also actually now if you look at Egypt, it's Cathy Ashton and it's Bernardino Leon, her special representative, who are the political players, if there are any, amongst the international community in the sort of political drama that's taking place there.
All right, thank you very much. Let's take the next three questions. Yes, Peruk Simic over there. Perhaps you could introduce yourself for everybody else. And I want two more. Okay, we'll go ahead and go ahead.
Very well, Peruk Simic, Faculty of Political Sciences, University of Belgrade. Just a question for all of you, including your team. Could you clarify a little bit these rumors about British-German position paper on the negotiation with Serbia to include as focal points not just chapters 23 and 24, but also chapter 34 or 35, the one that in Serbia would specifically include Kosovo to be opened first and to be closed last. So could you tell us a little bit more? That news just came across our media space. Thanks.
Okay, I have to say I don't know anything about this, so I'm going to give that to you. Yes, to two over there. Yes, a lady, and then Dan Anastasievich, number 3.
My name is Svetlana Petrakova. I'm from Moscow. My question is, could you please tell about the main problems which Slovenia faced during the integration process? And could you please give some advices to Serbia from the standpoint of the experience of your country? Thank you.
Dejan Anastasievich, Tanjug News Agency. As Julian has noted in the beginning, nobody could imagine how the region would look like, that this event will take place 20 years ago or 15 years ago. So the region has made a dramatic leap. But in 15 or 20 years from now, when Serbia hopefully enters the European Union, not only Serbia will be even more different, but European Union will be different, probably. Next year, there'll be elections, so we'll have new leadership of the European Union. There is increasing talk of the treaty changes which will have to happen. So the question is, concerning both guests are, as Tim said, in the heart of the beast. How do you think the institutions, European institutions, will be in which way they will be changed, and specifically the European External Action Service? Do we need institutional changes in order to strengthen foreign policy of European Union? Another sub-question is that there is increasing talk in Brussels that the Directorate for Enlargement will be maybe also changed in the future and will be downgraded to a part of EEAS. So these are I'd like some comments on that. This is the
okay,
question.
Fine. Sorry, but I just wanted one clarification, not from you, Dan, but from you from Moscow. I didn't quite understand. You were asking a question about Slovenia. What did you ask about? Okay, fine. Okay, so I understand. Okay, sorry. Okay, I understood there was a. Right. Okay. Sorry. First of all, Predrag Simic's question. I'm not sure what he's referring to. Do you know what he's referring to?
You start.
It's your paper.
The UK German non-paper. I mean, I think the point comes to a point that Miroslav made at the beginning, which is that this is a political process, but it's also a technical process. And for the UK, which is as I say, is a firm supporter of enlargement and of Serbia's accession, the key to this process is that the process is respected, that the conditions are there, that there's a real sense that these are benchmarks that aren't negotiable, but they do have to be overcome. And that we believe, by being consistent about that and being fair about that, is the best way to really incentivize the sort of reforms that will mean that when Serbia, Kosovo join the European Union, they are stable, successful, increasingly prosperous, democratic states. So the point that we in Berlin have made is that at the December European Council at the end of the year, there needs to be a process whereby we sign off on the negotiations beginning in January, but that we're sort of clear that we are, it's not just a sort of tick in the box. We will want to come and look at where things have got to and then be able to sign off confident in the knowledge that I'm sure we will be, that this process has already developed momentum and that we can be saying, yes, Serbia really is engaging on the issues that need to be addressed, and that we can go into these accession negotiations confident that actually we'll not just make progress but make good progress. That would be my answer to the first question. I'm happy to come on to the others. But.
Well, probably, I think you could probably address Dejan Anastasievich's question about the future.
I mean, this issue of institutional change, I think no one knows the answer to that. I mean, it comes down to this point about what is it that ultimately the different peoples of Europe want and will be prepared to support, and that if the right process of engagement can be achieved, whereby people are saying, yes, this process of European integration does represent me and I see the reasons for it and I feel engaged in it, then that process can go wherever it goes. But we're not yet at the stage where it's clear that there's a next wave of European integration, of institutional integration that is, if you like, politically not going to be controversial. So I think there's a process of consolidation that's going on now with the Euro crisis. And that in itself requires a considerable degree of institutional change. I mean, the British government's position is that actually for the euro area to stabilise, there needs to be quite a degree of institutional change, and we're very supportive of many of the proposals that euro member states have suggested for greater integration within the eurozone. But that's a debate that we're not a full part of. But there will be institutional change as part of that. The question is, what does that mean for the rest of the European Union, and how do you adjust the institutions of the European Union so it remains a union of all 28 and a level playing field, particularly the single market? And then the third question, which is, okay, what other integration do you do beyond that? I think that's further down the track once we've addressed those two crucial questions: integration within the Eurozone and what it means for the rest of the EU.
DG enlargement, will that exist as a separate...
I mean, this is a debate that's been going on in Brussels, but the issue is, do you bring enlargement into the External Action Service so better to promote both the political as well as the technical sides of enlargement? I mean, arguably, the progress that's been made here in Serbia would not have been possible without Cathy Ashton's engagement in this as the High Representative of the EAS, not the Director General or the Commissioner for Enlargement. The fact that she's worked so well in partnership with Commissioner Füle has been one of the reasons why there's been real progress. But I think there are some in the institutions who would argue that actually that is a better model, particularly when dealing with enlargement processes that have real political dimensions to them. That's a better model for overcoming both the political hurdles as well as the technical hurdles. So I don't think it's a downgrading of enlargement necessarily, but it is a different model that has worked well in this case. And the question is that a better model for, for also dealing with Macedonia, for Albania, maybe for the countries of the Eastern neighbourhood too?
I don't understand. Does that mean that you think in the next Commission there will be a DG enlargement, or there won't be a DG enlargement?
I think I think there will be.
There will be. Okay.
But there is a proposal that you would bring it into the EAS, but I think you'll still have a separate DG,
Right.
Commissioner for Enlargement.
There was I now understand a specific question for you. I mean, Mr. Putin the other day said that Britain was a small island and no one really cared, but at least he knew the name of Britain and he was, addressing his comments to the right person. It must be very annoying for you to be mixed up with Slovenia, but assuming that the question was about Slovakia, there was a specific question for you.
You get used to it, and it happens more than once, and it happened to me more than once that I was received officially by the head of states, and there was Slovenian flag instead of Slovakian flag in the room, including in one EU member state, so that was particularly amusing. So we've learned to live with that, no problem.
All right.
And to answer your question, of course, there have been years of very active communication between Slovakia and Serbia, and we are, of course, suggesting our friends to learn from our mistakes, not to repeat them, and a couple of general recommendations we make, and I can repeat here, is, first of all, to understand that the integration process is not something that is limited to a group of experts. It's really a nationwide exercise, because the future membership will affect every single citizen of this country, and therefore every single citizen of this country must know what it is about and what does it mean for his or her life. Whether we speak about political parties, about NGOs, about local self-government, about the churches, about everyone else, about the universities, they should be somehow involved into the process. So the idea that we introduced in Slovakia a National Convention on European Integration was exactly the nationwide platform where we discussed these issues, so people understood. It's really important, and I met with Minister Ružić earlier this morning, and I told him, it's good that you are the Minister for European Integration, but every member of the government must be a Minister for European Integration, responsible for his area. There must be no illusion that you are the one who is dealing with EU and with Brussels, and the rest of us will continue with the business as usual. It won't work. But people who are responsible for this process here in Serbia know exactly what needs to be done. So I was really preaching to the converted. It's important that you understand that the transformation is something you do in your own interest. You don't do it to please Brussels. And it's all about reforms. This is what counts, this is what gets you there. And obviously, every single decision, every step you make must be linked to your European future. So everything you do must follow as an answer to the question, is it going to help me to get me closer to the European Union or not? If not, then I should probably not do that. Whenever you adopt a law or make any political decision, you have to ask this question beforehand. So these are very general recommendations. Speaking about the non-paper, it was not received with enthusiasm among the EU member states, including in mine. Why? Because I believe that when we are creating the negotiating framework, we have to stimulate the pro-reform atmosphere in the country, rather than demotivate the country from entering into the process. It's important that the process is comprehensive, because we speak about the very radical transformation of the society. So you have to, no issue must be left unaddressed, but there is a time when to address which issue. So you start with issues which are more simple or more easy to answer now, and you come to the more difficult ones when you are closer to the end of the process, when you know already what it takes, when you already smell the taste of membership, so that you are properly motivated. So I think this paper asks the question of normalization too early. And second point I want to make about the paper is that, as I said, it's a complex and comprehensive process, and I don't think one issue should be put above the rest of other issues. So one issue should not have the sort of privileged position of being able to block the other processes. And here, I was surprised that this paper somehow makes normalization of relations more important than the old transformation of Serbian society to be eligible to join the European Union. So this is why I think these are my comments on this paper. And about the institutions, there is no much enthusiasm about another treaty changes in Brussels and among the member states now, but it might become inevitable, we'll see. The fact is that we speak about banking union, about the fiscal union, about the economic union. So we'll see how far can we go without changing the treaties. But there is no question that we need to continue with these processes for the European Union to stay attractive, competitive, and this is what we all want. And about these particular issues about the DG enlargement, of course, it's one thing that you write a paper, and the other thing is to put it in practice and to see how it works. So right now, we have the High Representative who is responsible for overall foreign policy of the European Union, and you have Commissioner for Enlargement and Neighborhood Policy who is responsible for part of the High Representative's agenda without a clear distinction of what should Stefan Füle do and what should Cathy Ashton do. So it's for the two of them to agree. But basically, his portfolio is part of hers. So you have the very strong administrative capacity when it comes to enlargement in the Commission compared to the EAS. When we speak about neighborhood policy, about the six eastern neighbors, there is no DG or no department in the Commission. So the Commissioner Füle, who is responsible for that, relies fully on the External Action Service and EAS capacities. So these are the issues which I don't see as problems, but obviously these issues will have to be addressed somehow so that there is institutional clarity. But I agree with Julian, I don't think that DG enlargement will disappear in the next Commission, but these issues are being discussed as a part of the EAS review process, so that there is clarity in how the jobs are distributed. And I think it's very normal that these issues are discussed, because you cannot foresee every single detail of the implementation of such a comprehensive paper as the Lisbon Treaty.
Okay, we've got 2 minutes left. I'm going to say one person. Yes, I can just see one hand there. I can't see who it is, but one hand over there, and then that's it. Please. Take the microphone.
National Assembly. Governor Tomic, National Assembly. I would like to have a comment from both of you, actually moderator included, about the announcement that was made by Mr. Lukšić, Montenegrin FMA, about B6, Balkan 6 countries, and the idea that he shared with all of us. Thank you.
Well, the Balkan six-pack, what do you think of that? Do we need it? Is it?
I support everything that stimulates the regional communication and cooperation. At the same time, when I read these papers, I'm asking myself whether this is a substitution for the EU membership. I don't think, okay, it's good to support every part of this initiative that brings each of the countries of this region closer and faster to the membership in the European Union. But avoid activities that will be duplicating or replacing the EU integration. You have no time, you have no capacity, and you have no need of doing so. So measure everything, including this initiative, through the optics of your future membership in the European Union.
Jim?
I'd agree with that. I mean, every country is joining the European Union on its own basis. But it is also absolutely clear that they will accelerate the more that they can build their economic links and resolve regional issues together. So a process whereby the countries that are joining the European Union are also saying, yes, we also need to be linking up across the region and promoting our common interests. That's a good one, but I think you have to avoid the formal structures that cut across EU processes or create a sort of a political confusion that somehow there is an alternative to the EU, which other member states, other countries that are wanting to join the European Union may disagree with. So yes, I agree with the spirit. Maybe the form is perhaps not the right one.
Well, since you asked me, I will second that. I mean, I tend to have a scepticism of some of the parliamentary assemblies that already exist in Europe, and think we may have too many parliamentary assemblies already in Europe. But there's absolutely no reason why there shouldn't be a Balkan model of cooperation drawing on some of these strengths of some of the useful things that the Benelux did, or the Nordic Council did, or Visegrad did, but would have to be one which you can't copy-paste. And I'm not quite sure whether in that form that's the right thing to do, because I'm, as I say, I'm sceptical about these parliamentary assemblies, which can often be junkets for MPs to go off and have a nice time and get sort of per diems. But on the other hand, anything that encourages cooperation between countries with similar background, similar history, and similar destinations is certainly to be welcomed. So, on that note, I think we will end. I've been asked to remind you that the next session, Helsinki Plus 40 Current Security Challenges, which should be starring, I should say, Mr. Vučić, the Deputy Prime Minister, and he has to leave, I think, a little bit early, so please be back at 11:30 sharp for that, because we don't want people sort of trailing in late and biting into the time then. So coffee now, 11:30. Thank you very much.